Okay, folks, we're back. We're going to finish up with part two. Yeah. Okay, so I've written some more stuff on my whiteboard here. So where we left off on part one, we're talking about the reforms of the reform of Cluny, right? That place in southern France that was gifted or granted in his will by William of Aquitaine to the church. And it is there that we start to see these reforms, try to get implemented. And these reforms are not of the kingdoms per se, but of the church, the people in the church, going all the way up to the top. And as we said, when you have amassed so much wealth and so much power as the Catholic Church did, by the time you get to the High Middle Ages, remember they've been around in some form or another for almost 800 years now at this point, and so that's a long time. And when you have amassed that amount of wealth and power, well, you are one of the movers, if not the mover and shaker in Europe. And that much money and that much power can go to people's heads. And we see that by the High Middle Ages. And this is not something new, but by the High Middle Ages, people, especially people in the church, lower level people, and some higher level people, are starting to take a look around, not at the others, and not just so much searching for heretics and people going against the teachings of the Catholic Church, but they're looking at themselves and saying, what are we doing? We're administering to the faithful and we're giving them all the rules that they need to live by. Remember, there is no entrance to heaven unless it's through the Catholic Church. You have to be a good, devout Catholic, a Christian to get into church. You can't just believe things the way you want to believe it. There's no such thing as freedom of religion in the Middle Ages. You have to believe in things the way you're taught. And if you're not, and if you don't do it that way, you're going to be punished. Okay. Now, I'm not saying that the church fathers, we're going to talk about this a little bit more next week, that the church fathers are just tossing people on the stake and burning them alive anytime they, whisper something bad against the church. That's not how it is. But these reformers are members of the church themselves, and they're looking in on themselves and saying, some of our group are getting, they're not doing what they should be doing. They're not taking care of the faithful the way they should. And so we see the reform of Cluny begin around the 900s, leading off into the year 1000. And they're focusing on many of the issues that, if you're a person outside of the church, you're starting to wonder. You're not going to say too much stuff out loud, but if you have some power in the community, like if you're a nobleman, you're starting to look at the church and fathers and be like, whoa, wait a second. You're sitting here condemning us and you're saying we have to live a certain way, but then many of your own group are living in their way, which is, I don't know, I guess the fun way. So we see these problems that are rising up, and we saw that in the last part. So the major problems are usury, right? The loaning money to people at high interest rates. That's a big no-no. It should be charity, or you should at least just get your money back when you loan somebody money, okay? But we see that. One of the few groups, and this will help add more fuel to the fire in condemnation and anti-Semitism against them, that practices this, because they have there's no prohibitions about this in their own religious teachings, are the Jewish communities. And we start to see that awful stereotype and that, that terrible, vindictive, spiteful prejudice against Jewish people when it comes to money, right? Around this time period, because the Jewish communities around Europe are always very small. Okay, there's that sizable portion like we talked about in Spain, but even there, the Jewish communities are very small in comparison to the Christian communities, and they're in their own little spots, right? Their own little ghettos in cities. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more too. But one of their professions is money lending, and so once again you see the rise of this this hateful, stereotypical and prejudiced idea that Jews, only care about money and all this other stuff. Well, to a large degree, in the Middle Ages, that was one of the few professions that they could legitimately do without being punished or kept from it. There was many things that they weren't allowed to do by law because they were Jewish. But one of them was money lending, and all this did was add. And because once again, they had no prohibition against charging you interest. If you came to me and I was a Jewish money lender and you needed money, I was going to make money off of you. You were going to pay me more money. I wasn't just going to give it to you out of some Christian idea of forgiveness and loans or something like that. I was going to make money off of you, and this helps lead to that that awful prejudice that we see for a very long time, even leading up to the modern age. So there's usury. There's simony. Remember, that is the idea of selling, the practice of selling high church offices to people that either are not proficient in what they need to be doing for that office, or just selling it to the highest bidder. Okay, which nobleman can give me most? I'm the head church official in this area. Which nobleman can give me the most amount of money so I can put somebody usually from his family in a position of power? And that was the point. These guys were not buying positions in the church for their sons to become the next great Jesus Christ figure, but as a way to move up in the world, to gain power, with the ultimate goal being obviously the Pope. Because if you made it to the head of the Roman Catholic Church, if you became the Pope, that was a position of extreme power, a position of extreme domination. The idea of simony, or selling these offices, was once again a huge no-no. And then also wrapping up with that, we see the idea of celibacy and not being celibate, right? The celibacy is staying away from sex, being faithful to the church. That was your office. That was the vows that you took. And we see throughout the Middle Ages, for a very, 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 very long time, many church officials, not all, right, but many church officials did not adhere to that prohibition. They had secret marriages. But usually it was just confined to girlfriends, mistresses. But these men would have children out of wedlock, right? Illegitimate children. They would carry on mistresses, and they would use the money that they were getting from donations to the church to pay for their girlfriends and pay for their illegitimate children. And this happened over and over and over again. Didn't matter where you were, France, Spain, England, didn't matter. This happened all the time, and it even went all the way up to the top. Like we talked about, there were numerous times where popes themselves had girlfriends and illegitimate children, and that was a huge no-no. So the Reforms of Cluny were trying to fix all that. Now, did they fix it? Well, just like with the Truce and Pact of God, tried to fix the sheer brutality of medieval life in Europe, it kind of worked and it really didn't. You can convince some people some ways of doing certain things, but you can't convince all the people, okay? And so the Reform of Cluny, it helps, bring back some of these wayward priests and bishops and cardinals and popes back to the fold. But these problems will continue. These problems will continue for a very, very long time until eventually, 500 years later, and this is where we're going to get to the end of our class, we have another priest, a German priest by the name of Martin Luther, who will see that these problems never went away. They kept going on, and he eventually says, you know what, that's it. We need to figure out something else, but we'll get there. The other thing we need to move on to when it comes to the church is this, okay? And this is the big one. Those other three are big too. There we go. Those other three are big too, but this was the big one, because this one just didn't affect the bishops and the church officials. This affected everybody, including the kings and emperors throughout Europe, okay? And this problem is called the investiture controversy, okay? Investiture, okay? Now you see that word, invest, and we know what that means. In this context, it's a little bit different though. So it's investiture, investiture controversy. And the question at hand is, who gets to appoint church officials in a kingdom? Okay? Who gets to appoint church offices in a kingdom. Okay, so like if a bishop dies, who gets to pick the new bishop? Okay, is it the Pope in Rome, or is it the king in wherever they are? Okay, so let's say that it's in England. Is it and a guy dies? Now, who is going to be in charge of appointing that next person in his position of power? Because it's not so much based on seniority, like rank and file. Like all of a sudden, here was the captain died. Now the next lieutenant just moved to be captain. It kind of works that way, and kind of doesn't work that way. It is who. The question here, and this question to us is, it's like, well, who cares for the most part? But in this time period, 1,000 years ago, this was so important that it was tearing kingdoms and tearing empires apart. And it threatened to tear apart the very institution of the church as well. And we'll explain why. So who gets to appoint church offices in a kingdom? Is it the Pope in Rome? Okay, because that's where the Pope always is. Or is it the king, wherever the king may be, right? In his capital, London or Paris or wherever. Why is this a problem? So I've made a little schematic here, okay? So we have the Pope and we have the king, all right? So we have the Pope, the head of the church in Rome, and then we have the king, the king, wherever the king may be. Or we can even put emperor up there as well, too. Underneath the Pope, we have the cardinals, okay? There are only so many cardinals. There's not like there's a million cardinals running around. Cardinals are the highest officials in a kingdom, highest church officials in a kingdom, okay? Because the Pope is not in France, or the Pope is not in England, okay? The cardinals, usually there's only one, maybe two, but there's usually only one in a kingdom, okay? That is the highest church official in that kingdom, okay? He reports to the king with certain matters, but for everything else, the main stuff, who does he report to? Doesn't report to the king, he reports to the Pope, okay? He is the Pope's highest official, church official in that kingdom. He is the cardinal, okay? And the cardinals are usually in the capital, in the main centers, okay? You might get two, depending how big the kingdom is, you might get two cardinals. But for the most part, it's at the beginning, it's one cardinal, okay? So there's only so many cardinals running around. These guys are very, very high in the hierarchy of the Roman Catholic Church, okay? He is in charge of, think of it like this, like if the Pope is the king, the cardinal is like the duke, right? So whatever the Pope wants, the cardinal says to the people underneath him, this is what the Pope wants, right? Okay. Underneath the cardinal, you have the bishops, okay? The bishops. Now, there are numerous bishops throughout a kingdom, okay? It is the next level of the Roman Catholic hierarchy, okay? A bishop is in charge of what's called a diocese, D-I-O-C-E-S-E. What the heck is a diocese? A diocese is an administrative center or area that a bishop controls in a kingdom, okay? So all the churches that are in that diocese, it doesn't matter if it's a little church or a big church, all of the priests that are in that diocese, all of the nuns, all of the monks, all of the everything that are in that diocese, their regional supervisor, right, their regional boss is that bishop, okay? So since you have a lot of these things throughout a kingdom, you have multiple bishops throughout a kingdom, right? You only have one or two cardinals in the kingdom, but you have multiple bishops throughout the kingdom because the entire kingdom is split into numerous ones of these, the diocese, okay? So for instance, in England, off the top of my head, around the year 1000, you might have about 12 dioceses, okay? They're all split up, okay? Now, this is not a political thing. So the king doesn't look at the diocese and say, oh, here's a county or here's, whatever it might be. That is marked on the religious map, okay? So that bishop is in charge of that diocese. And then his fellow bishop is in charge of the diocese next to him, and so on, okay? So for instance, like in the year 1000, in England, you might have about 12 bishops that are in charge of all of the other people underneath them. And then at the very bottom, obviously, you have priests, okay? You have just the run-of-the-mill priest, the person who actually administers to the poor, that hears confession, does all the stuff that is supposed to be happening in the local communities, okay? Priests, monks, abbots, nuns, all that. And obviously there's thousands of them, okay, all over the place. Why is this such a big problem? It is such a big problem because what does everything always come down to, folks? What have we talked about over and over and over again? What does it always come down to? What is that one word? Not just power, but what? Money, right? Money, 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 okay? This turns into a big, big, big problem around the year 1000, okay? And I'm going to give you a specific example of it. Because of, we're asking the question, where does the money go, okay? And who gets to appoint the person that does that? Now, here's the thing. If you're a person, you go, like at this time, you go to church, you know, infrequently. If you're a peasant, if you're a nobleman, you go to church, you know, a little bit more regularly, and you are expected to give a donation to that priest. Okay, you are expected to give a donation to that priest. Now, that donation is a fancy word, and it's called a tithe. T-I-T-H-E, tithe. Okay, that donation is collected by the priest. Okay, and he collects all the donations, all the tithes that he's gotten over the past month or whatever it might be. And what he does is he uses that money, a small portion of it, to administer to the poor, right? He sets up like a sick house, or if there's some kind of plague going on, you know, he's taking care, he and the other people are taking care of the people that are infected with the plague, whatever it might be. Let's say there's a food shortage or there's a drought. He's using that money to buy grain or supplies from somewhere else to feed the poor, feed the sick, you know, the people that are pushed off. Because remember, folks, this is the Middle Ages, so there's no such thing as any type of social safety nets, okay? There's no such thing as, it is way, way, way in the future before we get that, okay? There's no such thing as welfare. There's no such thing as unemployment. There's no such thing as anything like that. If something happens to you, if you develop a disease or you get kicked off your land or something like that, you have to rely on the generosity of usually the church, okay, to help you out. Because even if you have friends who are, you know, dealing with the same problems, they're dealing with their own problems. They can't help you. And the central government we're talking about is starting to coalesce, is starting to form, but they are nowhere near at a point where they can start offering those types of social contracts with the people. It's just not there. So the people that you go to for help is the church, the priest, right? The regular old priest. Well, he only spends a certain amount of that money because the priests are expected to live, you know, simple lives, right? They live usually at like the abbey or whatever it might be, or in their little homes, usually at the church, and they're not living large, okay? So that priest sends the majority of that tithe, that money, up to the bishops, right? Well, the bishop is getting all those tithes from all of these places in his diocese, right? So the bishop is living in a nice place because he's taking a cut of everything that he is gaining from all these different villages and towns, okay? And he's using a part of that money to administer to his whole diocese, right? If they're gonna build a cathedral there, or if they're gonna do something even bigger there, okay? And he's doing okay because there's only a few of them running around as opposed to, you know, there's hundreds and hundreds and thousands of priests, okay? So the bishop takes his cut. And then what do all the bishops in that kingdom do? They send what they have up to the cardinal. The cardinal takes his cut for major transactions, major improvements. Like if they're going to build a cathedral that might take 58 years to build, some gigantic dedication to God. He's gonna take a cut for that. The cardinal's living a good life. You know, he's certainly not hungry and he's certainly not poor. He's dressed in nice robes. He's got nice shoes. He's a wealthy man. Okay. And then what are all the cardinals in Europe doing? They're sending the remainder, the vast majority, to Rome, to the Pope. Okay, to the Pope. And so the Pope is there in the Vatican doing their thing, and all that money is flooding in. Now, why is this a problem? What the heck is this investiture controversy? As you can see, I've drawn little arrows here because the Pope believes that he is above the king. Doesn't matter what king. The Pope believes, nope, I am the anointed one. I'm the one that's chosen, yes, by the other cardinals, but the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, God went through them, and I'm the right one for this job. I'm the one who was picked. So you may be the king, but I am still over you, okay? Because I am the Lord's anointed one on earth. I am the, I hold the keys to the kingdom of heaven, okay? Only through me can you make it to heaven. If you're the king, doesn't matter where you are, you're looking at the Pope saying, at best, we're equals. You are certainly not over me. You control nothing except the spiritual lives of the people, but I control the people. They're my people, okay? You might control, their, who they pray to, what they pray to, but their lives, their very lives belong to me. Their families belong to me. Their land is mine. Everything about them is mine, okay? Now, what's the problem here? Where does the money go? The kings in Europe are watching, they've been watching this for a long time, that a lot of their money, where is it going to? Is it going back to them as taxation? Are they getting the money? No. When it's given as a tithe to a priest, it now becomes property of the Pope. Eventually it will make it back to him. And so it's leaving, that money, right, is leaving the kingdom. It's not going to the king. It's not going to his pet projects. It's not going to build him new armies. It's not going to build him a new palace. He's still getting all that he's getting taxes from the people, but a huge chunk of that money is being siphoned out every year through religious channels and going to the Pope. So the Pope is getting Italian money, the Pope is getting German, French, doesn't matter. It's all the same. It's all gold and it's all coming to Rome. And so these kings and these emperors start having a little fit about it, basically. And also, not just that, it's not just about that's 99% of it, but it's also the idea that it's a matter of pride. If you're the king, and if you give in to the Pope, you're basically saying, yeah, I'm the king, but there's somebody above me. The Pope is in charge, and the Pope gets to do what he wants to do in my kingdom. And for most kings, they can't handle this. They don't like it, okay? So, moving on quickly, this all comes to a head around the year 1000, excuse me, a little bit after the year 1000, where we get the Holy Roman Emperor, okay? And that Holy Roman Emperor is, at the time, this guy here. His name is Henry IV. Okay, I'm gonna write down his name because we're gonna hear about another Henry later on, and I don't want you to get the two confused. Okay, so Henry IV, he is the Holy Roman Emperor, and he basically, somebody dies, and he appoints their successor. He says, you're going to be the next whatever, so-and-so here, the next bishop. Well, word gets back, obviously, to the Pope. Here, let me get rid of this. Word gets to the Pope in Rome. Okay. And the Pope is pretty much saying to himself, nah, that's not how it works. I am the Pope. You don't get to pick who gets to administer to the people. You don't get to pick a high-ranking person in my organization. That's not what happens. I'm the Pope, so I get to choose who's going to be there. So we have this battle between Henry IV, and the Pope, and his name at the time, the Pope at the time, is Pope Gregory VII. Okay, so there's a big battle. Who gets to decide? Is it Henry IV, the Holy Roman Emperor? I mean, this guy he's in charge of this empire, right? He's got all of these people underneath him that are looking at him saying, who's in charge here? And then you got the Pope, Pope Gregory VII, basically saying, no, I'm in charge. And they get in this fight, the investiture controversy, okay? It gets so bad, this fight, that it turns to it turns to a battle. Henry IV, he invades Rome, and he puts the Pope under siege. Okay, so the Pope is hiding out in one of his forts there. It's an old Roman fort called Castel Angelo in Rome. And he literally has the Pope and his guys. He's taken over the whole city. He has him there basically saying, I won't let you come out. Now he's in a tough spot here. It's still the Pope, even though he's fighting with him. He can't just have him dragged down and executed, because that would be, well, nobody would forgive him, and his own head would end up on a spike. But he can't just give up and say, no, you're right, because then he would lose all authority when it comes to this. So he invades Rome. Pope Gregory uses the tool that most popes use against kings that think they're too big for their britches, and he threatens him with this. So he threatens him with excommunication. So basically, the Pope, and many popes use this as a threat, and sometimes they go through with it, and in the case of Gregory VII, they do, to excommunicate Henry IV, which basically is he's not only kicking him out of the church, and so if you are out of the Roman Catholic Church at the time, it's not like you can just go find another church. There is no other church. He basically says, I'm in charge of the church, so I will kick you out if you don't stop this. Not only that, but since I'm the only way to heaven, to God, if I kick you out of the church, I'm literally locking the door of heaven to you. You cannot come into heaven because I have kicked you out of the church. And so they fight with each other. Henry IV does get excommunicated. Okay, he gets so mad at the Pope about this that he sets up his own Pope called the anti-Pope. So basically, he goes and grabs another religious official, high-ranking official, a cardinal, and he says, hey, you can side with the Pope or you can side with me. If you side with me, I will make sure that you have a ton of power and everything else. And he finds a guy, and so he sets up an anti-Pope. So now there's two popes running around Europe. This will continue on and off for the next 600 or so years, 500 years. And basically, whenever an imperial or a king doesn't like the Pope at the time, he sets up his own Pope. Obviously, Pope Gregory says that guy's a fake. I'm the real Pope. He's nobody. The other thing with excommunication is he basically commands the people in the Holy Roman Empire, you don't have to listen to the king anymore, or the emperor anymore. He's been kicked out of the church. He's just like you now. You don't have to listen to his orders and instructions. So now the people, especially the nobles, are caught between a rock and a hard place. Do we keep supporting the emperor because he's the emperor, or do we keep supporting the Pope because if the Pope keeps being pissed off at us, well, we're going to have this fight with our own people. So what do? Well, eventually, who settles this little problem? It is Henry's own mother. So Henry IV is camped outside of Rome there, and he's got the Pope, locked up. And his own mama comes, Matilda, that's her name, Matilda, and she's a devout Catholic, and she says, look, I love you, you're my son, but you're being a pain in the butt. And then she says to the Pope, look, I love you, you're God's, anointed one on earth, but you're driving my son crazy. And so, this old drawing we see, the Pope is sitting down, her son, the current emperor, Henry IV, is there in supplication to her, right? And she is, he is kneeled down in front of her, and there she is. She's like the emperor's mother, right? She's the Empress Matilda. She doesn't hold any actual power, but she's still a high, and this is an amazing thing because number one, she doesn't actually hold any, she's not the empress, not like it's his wife, but she's the former empress. And number two, it's a woman. here's the two most powerful men in Europe are basically coming to her, and she's the mediator. She's trying to fix this problem. She's trying to get it sorted out. And they eventually come up with this solution. It's not a great solution, but it's better than them fighting with each other. In the German town of Worms, I love that. It looks like worms, American worms. In the German, it's Worms. And I want you to pay attention to this city, because we're going to see the city again for almost the exact same thing 500 years later. They come up with a concordat, or an agreement, and that happens in the year 1122. And what it basically says, in a nutshell, is that the Pope is in charge of naming who gets to be put in these religious offices, not the king or the emperor. However, you got to toss the emperor a bone, you got to toss the king a bone, basically saying the emperor gets almost like a veto power. He can look at the different guys that have been chosen, right? The candidates, and he gets to decide, I like this guy. Nah, I don't like this guy. Yeah, I would vote for this guy, but no, I want to vote for this guy. Okay? It's an uneasy truce. Henry IV gets excommunicated, reinstated a couple times. But it's going to be a major fight. And this fight is going to continue on for a very, 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 very long time. Because remember, the idea is that who controls the money and who controls the kingdom? Is it the Pope, or is it the king? Okay, and this Concordat of Worms, all it kind of does is put a band-aid on the problem. It doesn't solve the problem, but they really can't come up with anything else at the time. Okay, all right. There he is, Henry IV, and moving on. I remember when I went to school and I wanted to study history, and I was with one of my professors. He said, "Well, what do you want to specialize in when you're studying history?" And I said, "I want to talk about the Crusades." And he went, "Oh," and he yawned. And I said, "What's that supposed to mean?" He goes, "Well, there's so many Crusader historians out there." And I said, "I don't care," and then I want to be one of them. I love talking about the Crusades. I love talking about this idea of of religion. It's horrible, but religion as an impetus for war, because it kind of brings everything full circle. Okay, people have been fighting and killing each other for a multitude of reasons since human history has begun. The first humans were sitting there bashing each other with rocks because maybe they wanted to steal the food that one group had hunted, or they wanted to take a cave or something like that. And then it gets a little bit more advanced as people get more advanced, right? So now people are fighting over, money. They're fighting over more land. They're fighting over trade. They're fighting over women. But eventually, people start fighting over religion. They start killing each other in the name of religion. And it was very interesting to me. It's like, you have, especially when it comes to the Crusades, you have these two groups that are both saying we're right, okay, and that there's no other recourse besides us. It's a zero-sum game, all or nothing. You either believe or you don't, and if you don't, you're going to be punished here and in the afterlife. And so you have these two groups, Islam and Christianity, with the poor Judaism kind of caught in the middle. And they begin this struggle for the identity, the religious identity of Europe and the religious identity of the Holy Land that will continue for on and off for hundreds and hundreds of years. And it will keep going on and on and on for hundreds of years. The idea that I have to destroy you because that is what I've been told to do in the name of religion, which is very strange, very interesting, but very strange, very confusing. You have two religions that are based off of to many degrees, the same teachings, they're based off the same Abrahamic teachings, and they have the same prophets and prophetesses and holy ideas in both groups, but they look at them differently and they think about them differently, and so we get the rise of the Crusades, and it's very captivating to me why people would do this, and the reason being is because in the Middle Ages you have a time period, like I said, where it's a very brutal time period. People are fighting, people are dying young, and you have a whole group of people, not just knights. That's the biggest one, but people underneath that have not reached the knighthood, but they are warriors. They are fighters. They have been trained, and it doesn't take much training to bash somebody's head in. But it does take training to bash somebody's head in and survive to bash somebody's head in again the next day, and not just get your own head bashed in the very next minute. And I kind of look at it with the Crusades in Europe at this time when they start as, well, it had to start somewhere, and what are the reasons why it started? And why did it go on for so long? And that's what we're going to talk about, all right? So, in order to talk about the Crusades, we have to move over a little bit geographically back to our old friends in the East, okay? So remember, we have the Eastern Romans here, right? The Byzantines. We haven't talked about them in a couple weeks. By the year, around the year, approaching the year 1100, the Byzantines are not doing so well. Their heyday is long past, okay? The heyday was under Justinian, right, we talked about, and a little bit after that. But that was, at this point, 500 years ago, okay? In like the 500s and 600s. That was a long time ago. And slowly over time, the once great, Eastern Roman Empire, it's amazing that in the year 1100, it's still there. Because remember, this is the half of the empire that's set up by Constantine the Great. It's slowly been chiseled away, right? None of this is controlled by them. It started getting chopped away by the Islamic advance in the 600s. And by the time you get to the year 1100, this has all been eaten away, okay? It's all been chopped away. Whoops. And there's not really much they can do about it, okay? But in the 1090s, we see oops. Okay. In the 1090s, we see a new emperor come to power. And like most emperors, as we've seen over hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, he's a military man, okay? He's a general, and he assumes power, and he starts a new dynasty with his family. Now remember, these people are largely Greek, right? Total Greek identity. They speak Greek. Greek is the language of court in Constantinople. And Constantinople's still there. It's still the largest, most prosperous, trade bustling, exotic city on the planet, okay? It still has over, around the year 1100, there's still over 350, almost 400,000 people in Constantinople. With the surrounding people that live there, it pushes over 500,000. It's huge, it's humongous, okay? It's still the center of East and West, right, where they meet, the Asia and Europe and Africa, those 3 points on the compass, okay? Paris, London, they're all fly specks in the year 1100, Yeah, William the Conqueror is running around, or whatever, his sons and grandsons are running around in the year 1100 as kings, but London is a dump, there's a couple thousand people who live there, it's nothing. Same thing with Paris, it's overcrowded, it's gross, it stinks. Any place, a urban area, usually in Europe at this time. It's just not good. But Constantinople is huge. Okay, it's a vibrant economy once again because it's the place where all of the stuff for the spices and luxury goods from the east are coming into Europe. Most of that is still huge luxury for Western Europeans. But in the 1090s, we see the rise of a new emperor in the east, and his name is, I'm giving you the Latinized version of his name, Alexius Comnenus. Okay, the first. He's the first of his family, first of his name. Here you go. That's what he looks like, mosaic of him. Okay, he consolidates power and he fights many battles against the Islamic armies. Okay, excuse me. The biggest problem that he has to face is the rise of a new group of Islamic warriors and people, and those are the Seljuk Turks. Okay? And the Seljuk Turks, end up giving their name to the modern country of Turkey. Okay? And here they are. So over time, over fighting, different Islamic caliphates have come and gone. They've collapsed, they've fallen apart. But the Seljuk Turks around the year 1100, they control all this. Okay? They own all of this. They've taken everything here. The old Arabian Peninsula, they've taken all that. They've taken most of Egypt as well. And most importantly, they have taken the holy city of Jerusalem, okay? The place where Christ lived and died and was crucified and everything else, okay? Now remember, Jerusalem by this point is a holy city for all three of these religions, not just for the Christians, but for the Muslims and the Jews, okay? And it has been out of Christian hands now at this point by 1100 for almost 500 years, for half a millennium. It's been out of Christian hands. The Christians, though, still take pilgrimages to the Holy Land. Okay, so if you're a pilgrim, you take a holy experience, set off on a holy journey to go from wherever you are. It takes years to get there. Okay, and you make it there, and you reflect, and you do your thing. Okay. And you walk the footsteps of Christ, and you go see all the holy places, everything else. Now, if you're a Christian, obviously you're in enemy territory here. The Seljuk Turks have a hold on one second.